You'll have a guy who's like a brown belt, but because he's so dependent upon the gi, when he goes and does, Nogi, he's struggling to compete against blue belts.
Hey there, I'm Stefan Kesting, and this is the Strenuous Life Podcast. Hello, podcast listeners. Today's conversation is with Nick Chewy Albin from Jujitsu. This is a really good one, and I'm sure you're going to like it. But before we get started, do me a favor. If you haven't already subscribed to the podcast, if you just came across this somehow, please do subscribe. And if you are subscribed, then a rating or a review of the podcast is just pure gold. That is the fuel that keeps me going and keeps me producing these podcasts for you. So if you do that, we'll call it even, and I'll see you on the mats. Now let's get started with the podcast. Hey, Chewy, welcome to the podcast.
What's going on, dude? Glad to be here.
Oh, I'm so glad that you're here. I've got a lot of requests for you, actually. I posted a request for podcast on Reddit, and your name came up quite a few times. So we've been sort of swimming in the same waters for a while, but we've never actually met because you're Eastern time zone, not East Coast, as we just talked about before.
Right. We're not quite East Coast, but we're Eastern time zone, and you're up in the, what do they call it, the Great White North?
I'm in the very green part of the Great White North. I'm in Vancouver, British Columbia, which has got a climate pretty much like Seattle.
Okay, so cool.
We bitch and moan about there being snow here for a couple of weeks a year. So
so it's not bad at all.
No, it's not the standard dog sled driving
image of Canada.
Existence. Yeah.
Right.
Mounties on every corner. Not exactly right. But you're in Lexington area? Kentucky?
Louisville, Kentucky. So Lexington's a little bit more east than me. I'm in Louisville.
Okay. And you run your own school?
Yeah. So run and own my own school there in the city. It's called Derby City Mixed Martial Arts.
Why don't we just start, because you got an interesting story about this, of why you even started in grappling.
Well, I got my start in grappling and wrestling in high school, which segued into Jujitsu. So you kind of look back at things that happened in your life and you kind of find like meaning to them, And so there was a situation when I was in seventh grade, which, so that would have made me, I guess, around like 11 years old. And I was walking home I got dropped off the school bus and walking home, which is typically, like a 5-minute walk. And I was walking down the street and, I got a weird gut feeling. And as an adult, you kind of know what that is. As a kid, I didn't know what it was. And I look behind me and there's these three, I call them kids, but one of them was an adult. The other two were teenagers, and they're walking in sort of a weird sort of pace. And so I sort of felt weirded out and I walked a little faster. I look back, they're walking faster. And then I sort of start jogging and I look back and they're jogging. And I don't know why, but I stopped about 3 houses down from my home and I turned around and looked at them. And one of them just immediately punched me in the nose, broke my nose. There's blood everywhere. And one of them hit me with a bat. And I've never seen these guys ever. It was just I didn't live in the best neighborhood. And these guys were like, one of them was like a foster kid and, he'd had a rough life. And, the other two were very similar. And so just some kids that for some reason saw me as an easy target. I was, I don't know, small kids. So they came up and beat me up. Luckily, one of my neighbors came out and chased them off, but it was a traumatic experience. And so that kind of made me into this reclusive young kid who started gaining weight. And I stopped going outside and exercising and all this stuff. And by the time I got into high school, I was just like, my confidence was shot. And I remember some of the, somehow got pulled onto the football team, and all the football players were some of the guys that were like wrestlers that also played football. They were always like the toughest dudes on the football team. And, I started talking to him about wrestling. They're like, oh, you got to do it. And I remember doing like my first wrestling practice and I was just hooked from the get-go. You know what I mean? That was like my first, little sort of foray into to grappling. And it was awesome because that like completely changed me around as a person, because I started losing weight, became confident. And I soon found that a double leg is one of the best things for self-defense that you can ask for. Like you go around to people that are picking on you, you just put them in a double leg. That kind of takes the fight out of them. So that was my first little entry into grappling, was wrestling.
What was it about that first wrestling class that hooked you? Like, was it getting smashed? Was it the physicality of it?
I don't know. I've thought about this a long time. Like, even jiu-jitsu, like, what is it about doing this that like grips me so much, and I try to think about it, and it, I can't explain it. Like I remember, getting my butt whooped when I was wrestling and, couldn't do anything. And I, remember the first time I did jiu-jitsu and same thing, and I remember just being exhausted, but somehow it was just like, it was just awesome. So I don't know. Maybe some people are meant to do certain things, and maybe I was just meant to grapple. I don't know. But the physical like exertion that's used, the learning aspect of it, and just even when you're getting beat down, I find it just so much fun. So I don't know what it is, but there's something about it that just draws me in.
Okay. And how long did you wrestle for, and at what level did you wrestle at?
I only wrestled in high school for about 3 years. So I started my sophomore year because I was too chicken to do it the freshman year. So I started my sophomore year and then wrestled to my senior year. And so it was like 3 years. And then I actually became a lot better of a wrestler afterwards, because in jiu-jitsu, we've had so many guys over the years that were like college level wrestlers and stuff like that. Cause I never wrestled in college. I wrestled in high school and that was it. And then after high school, I got right into jiu-jitsu, and then I started wrestling with all these college wrestlers that were doing jiu-jitsu at the same time. And so my wrestling actually got a lot better through those guys and through training with them.
Wow. Do you think that was just a higher level competition, or were these guys sort of more technical in a way that high school wrestling isn't?
These guys they've been through more. Like a lot of them were college wrestlers, and some of them were really good. Like, they were like All-Americans and stuff like that. And these guys just had a deeper understanding of, because again, when you're teaching high schoolers, especially back then, you didn't have people doing wrestling like all year round. Like now there's like camps for these guys, and they have these training facilities for these young wrestlers that they can train almost year round. Back then you couldn't do anything like that. And so, it's just this, when I got out of high school and started wrestling with these guys that had been in college and they'd been All-Americans and stuff, these guys were just so much more technical. They had more knowledge. They'd been through more competitions, and they'd simply just been on the mats longer doing just wrestling than, the people that, we were doing wrestling with in high school. So it was just, just like anything else, if you took a guy who'd been grappling for 10 years opposed to say 4 years, the guy with 10 years is probably going to have more knowledge under his belt than the other one.
Well, I think if your goal was to produce the ultimate jiu-jitsu athlete, I think you'd be hard pressed to find a better base other than having done jiu-jitsu since you were 2 years old, to start in wrestling. I mean, maybe the second best there would be rock climbing, because rock climbers have got unholy isometric strength and grips. But I think there's something about wrestling that translates incredibly well to jiu-jitsu in the way that, ironically, judo doesn't always. Judo sometimes translates and sometimes doesn't.
Yeah, I've noticed that, I don't know what that is. I know that the wrestlers, like, as far as wrestlers, I mean, it's just there's a mentality aspect to it, like with like that wrestling mentality, they're just gritty. You know what I mean? Like if you ever like roll with a wrestler, they're just always tough. And which is
not to say there aren't incredibly tough judo guys out there.
Oh no. I mean, gosh, you have to be a tough judo guy, I wasn't trying to imply that judo guys are not tough. Cause I mean, obviously judo.
No, that was my implication.
Judo.
I'm going to be the one getting the hate mail, not you.
But yeah, so I mean, with wrestlers, I'm not sure why it translates over, I think, better to jiu-jitsu. Maybe it's because of the fact that once you hit the ground, you can still do things. Like, I mean, in judo, you have a very limited amount of time on the ground. You got to be very fast, and there a lot of times in judo, you expose your back a lot, right? Like in wrestling, you do it on the ground a lot, but in judo, a lot of times, like with the throws and things like that, a lot of times you have to turn and for some of them and expose your back. I'm not sure, but I think wrestling is a good base as long as the wrestler is willing to give up the wrestler in them, because what happens is if you get like the wrestler who like doesn't want to be a jiu-jitsu practitioner, they still want to be a wrestler, they, turn their back and they get choked out just the same, so they have to like let go of the feeling of it's not okay to be on their back and, these sorts of things.
Yeah, it's an interesting description, because anybody who's been around the game will immediately recognize that wrestler who wants to wrestle instead of doing jiu-jitsu. I mean, it's one thing to take your skills, take your techniques, take your tenacity, take your drive, and apply it doing jiu-jitsu. But if you're only ever playing that game, sure, you will pin white belts to their back, right, and ride them out. But you're not going to get any better at the sport, and you're very, very quickly going to hit a plateau.
Absolutely. We had a guy here who was a college wrestler. I mean, he was a nasty college wrestler, really tough. And he'd wrestled at a really good school. And when he came to the gym, the guy was just, He told me one time, he was so rough. He told me one time that his college wrestling coach told him that he needed to chill out a little bit, that he was too rough. And for someone,
college wrestling coach.
yeah. So when you're a college wrestling coach, you know, like when you're talking about college wrestling, you're talking about like, hey, they place a premium on, you know, being a little rough. And when he's telling you to ease up a little bit, that means you're a really rough person. But he would come into the gym and I watched him, he could take a black belt and, you know, put them on their back and just squeeze the piss out of them and inside control. And they would be hard pressed to get out sometimes. And, you know, he would do this sometimes when he would do, you know, regular matches against white belts, blue belts, whatever. And, you know, but he had the same problem though, is that if he went to a tournament, if sometimes he would go up against a wrestler or he'd go up against a jiu-jitsu guy who could somehow sweep him over, that he was just, you know, he was a turtle on his back, you know, he's just dead in the water. He couldn't do anything. And I remember like trying to get him to like understand, like, look, you've got to like start playing around with different stuff. You know, like when he lost the tournament because the guy got him on his back and he just couldn't do anything. He still didn't click. He's like, I just got to get my takedowns better. I'm like, no. And then one day I was training with him and I put him on his back and I put him in side control and I held him there the whole entire time. It was like a 6 or 7 minute round and I just held him for 6 or 7 minutes afterwards after I swept him. And then I was like, do you see like how boring that was? Like that was a terrible roll. We didn't really get anything out of it. We didn't learn anything. We didn't get to try new weapons. And he looked at me and said, man, you did a really good job of pinning me. And I was like, no, I was like, wrong lesson. I'm not trying to share that with you. I'm trying to get you to like embrace jiu-jitsu, not like, you know, be like, yeah, good squeeze. But you know, you gotta like as a wrestler, you've got to embrace the jiu-jitsu if you're going to do jiu-jitsu.
I think, I mean, obviously one of the transitions you need to do is moving from no-gi to gi and having more handles as well. So, I mean, you currently do gi and no-gi. What are your thoughts on making the transition back and forth between those two arts?
I mean, I'm a proponent for doing both. If you're going to train, I think you should do both jiu-jitsu and gi and no-gi. You know, again, some people only want to do one or the other. I think doing both of them has a really big value to it. You know, for wrestlers, if they're going to transition to it, you know, they have to learn how all those old handles that they had on the body work in the gi, right? Because that's important. Like if you're grabbing the collar and the head, well then, you know, or the biceps that you might have in a steering wheel tie or something like that, then you got to understand how to use the lapel the same way, how to grab onto sleeves and the collar and things like that. But you know, anyone that's doing jiu-jitsu, you've got to, like, to me, if you're going to do gi and no-gi, you got to be able to bounce back and forth. And the value to that is that you learn how to, one, like if you do gi or no-gi jiu-jitsu, you learn how to use your body and you learn how to only use your body to control someone, right? Like holding on to people's, like, you know, for instance, there's no grips on the back in the gi or the no-gi, but you can grab onto the lat, which can give you a good handle sometimes. You know, so different things like that. And then if you bounce to gi, then you've got to learn how to like take those same grips and, you know, balance in between the two. And I think that is valuable because if you go to tournaments, you can do gi or no-gi for competitions. And even in a street situation, you know, people may act like the gi is sort of antiquated and that it doesn't have a value. But if you've ever grappled it,
man, if you're fighting somebody who's only wearing board shorts or maybe a Speedo, you're probably in the wrong place.
Right. So, I mean, if you're wearing any sort of clothing, like we did a video, it's like suit rolling. We do it every year for Halloween, and it's a ridiculous video where we wrestle in suits and just whatever we can pick up at thrift stores. And I remember, like, it was a joke, but what you found out was like, man, this, like, you were doing gi moves everywhere. Like if someone had any sort of like jacket or any, you know, even a long sleeve shirt, like they were just done. You know what I mean? Like you could just grab even a t-shirt. You could manipulate that t-shirt to do collar chokes and stuff like that. So there's definitely a value to it. And so I think it's good to do both. But as a wrestler, you definitely have to relax a little bit because the gi is going to be so frustrating in the beginning. Like I know that when I started doing the gi, I just wanted to throw the damn thing in the corner and I hated it. And it wasn't until I sort of just like, you know, took a breath, like relaxed, that I was able to start to like figure it out.
Yeah, it would have been no different than you making the transition from freestyle to Greco or high school to Greco wrestling. It would be all different. And your previous experience would only take you so far. I think sometimes people who really become specialists in areas that are only possible, either gi or no gi. So, you know, gi-dependent De La Hiva guard stuff or gi-dependent spider guard, or on the other side, a very, very leg lock intensive game in the no-gi. They don't like making the transition because they lose all of their best weapons. They lose their spider guard sweep, or in no-gi mostly, all of a sudden they can't, you know, reap the knee. They can't go for their heel hook, and they've got to relearn a larger part of their game than if they had more of a well-rounded game. So arguably gi and no gi crossover make sure that you have a semi-well-rounded game.
Yeah, this is something I was talking to one of my students about the other day. Like when I was a blue belt, I think it was a Dean Lister interview. It was written down at the time. We didn't have streaming video like on YouTube back in 2003. It wasn't everywhere. But when I started doing jiu-jitsu, I read an interview, and I want to say it was Dean Lister, where he was saying that he, did gi and no gi, but he tried to make sure that his game was, transferable to either or, so he wasn't limited. And I've seen that with some of my students. I have some guys that play really they'll play things like worm guard and like lapel, lapel guards, and then I have some guys that are like heavy into leg locks. And it's so funny because, like you just said, when they go over to the other form of jiu-jitsu, they sometimes are nerfed, and you'll have a guy who's like a brown belt, but because he's so dependent upon the gi, when he goes and does no-gi, he's struggling to compete against blue belts who are more comfortable in no-gi. And so I think it's important to be able to balance your training in. And we're all going to have some like predominantly gi and no-gi moves, but you don't want to have like your core part of your game dependent upon like, well, what kind of clothes are they wearing? It should be something that's transferable to both. Like the grip should be adjustable to one or the other.
Oh no, you've got an Atama A4. This move doesn't work on an A4.
Right.
If only you're wearing an A5.
Yeah, you want to be able to like not to be dependent upon so many variables. They have to have this one type of gi that has a lapel that's about this length, and if they don't have that, then my game's like I'm shot.
Speaking of the gi, take us a little bit through your jiu-jitsu journey. Who did you start with, and how long did it take you to advance through the ranks and that sort of thing?
Okay. So I started in 2003 in May. I was still in high school, and I'll share this with some guys. Maybe if they get some new people out there, I was so nervous to go to my very first jiu-jitsu class that I had to invite two buddies with me. I had to have some buddies with me doing it, and I had wrestled before, but I was just so nervous, and there wasn't the kind of information that was out there that like there is now. And but I went out and did my first class in May 2003. I was training under a guy named Mike Yanas back then. And he was originally one of the guys I was training under. He was under Pablo Popovich, and he was a purple belt. And so I started learning under him, and I trained for about a month, and then I had to take off some time for several months because of not having a car to get out there. And I had to do like a 45-minute drive one way to get to the gym that was there, and then got my blue belt. I started training back again in December. Got my blue belt in April of 2004, and then I got my purple belt a little too soon. I got my purple belt after my first MMA fight, like maybe what was that, 2004, 2006, and then I was a purple belt till 2008, and then got my black belt in 2011. And so that's kind of like the time frame that we're looking at. But so that's kind of like the sort of how everything happened as far as the time windows go.
Was MMA a goal or kind of a side project?
Well, I originally got into jiu-jitsu because I wanted to fight mixed martial arts, right? Like I watched UFC, and that was what got me interested in, jiu-jitsu. And so I wanted to do mixed martial arts. It was my goal. And so I looked at mixed martial arts fighters, and what I always noticed was that anyone that was good at takedowns typically didn't have much of a ground game. Like back then, it was like you'd have these wrestlers that would take people down, and they would try to ground and pound. And typically around that time period, they were beginning to tire out. Like they would just get tired. And so they would just eventually either, maybe win a decision, or they would get submitted or kicked in the face or something. Mark Coleman, Mark Kerr, all those guys, like those were my guys I watched, and I was just like, man, why don't they learn jiu-jitsu? And so for me, I was like, well, I'll still work on my wrestling and improve, and I will learn jiu-jitsu, because I figured that would be sort of the logical progression: take the person down and submit them in the fight quickly. And so I wanted to fight, and so I was actually going to fight as soon as I got my blue belt, but I had like a meniscus tear that sort of derailed that. And then, ended up having the fight in 2006. And so I fought for about 6 years, I guess it was 2006 to 2012. And so I originally started as, a person that wanted to fight. And then as I got into jiu-jitsu and MMA, I realized that I really loved jiu-jitsu and was sort of okay with mixed martial arts.
So how many fights did you have in all?
I was 13-0-1. So I didn't really fight too like many big fights, but I had 13 fights, combined amateur and pro, 3 pro. I had,
well, that's still putting it on the line a whole number of times.
Sure. Put it on the line, had some fun doing it, and I would probably say my last couple of fights were more of like gym promotion. Like all the guys liked watching me fight. Like I didn't even really want to fight that much anymore, but like my guys, my team liked watching me fight. And so I knew that when I was getting ready for it, they would be all jazzed up about it. And so, I'd go out there and fight to put it all on the line and sort of promote the gym a little bit at the same time to help build up the gym name when I was first becoming a head full coach and doing this stuff full time. And, but eventually I was just like, I can't do this anymore, but it was a good time.
How did your strategy of take them down, pass the guard, and submit them work? I mean, that was your vision of combining the two.
Yeah, it worked pretty well. Like, I mean, I don't, again, I fought anybody that would, fight me in this area. And I fought a couple of pretty darn tough guys. And some of the guys weren't tough. It's just the way it is with amateur fighting. But in the pros, I fought some tough guys. But the tactic, I mean, it worked out great. I would take people down. And typically most of the fights were over in the first round because, if that's what you're focused on, like if that's your game plan. I'm going to take the person down, get them down to the ground, and then immediately submit them or do your best to submit them. Like you have a game plan and you're going out there and executing. And so I was able to execute that pretty well against the opponents, so most of the fights in the first round. So it worked out pretty well.
Did you ever get seriously injured in all this time?
You mean like from fighting or just in general?
Well, let's start with fighting.
Sure. I never really got too injured. I mean, you had like random training mishaps and stuff like that. Nothing too crazy. But, one of the reasons that I stopped fighting in 2012 was because of the fact that during the fight, me and the opponent had a pretty good tussle. We the first round was mostly striking with one another, and he hit me with a pretty big overhand right that, like, when I got hit with it, I could see him in front of me, and then it's like I blinked, and then I woke up, like I came back to about 3 steps back from where I was originally. It was like you just had this flash of like you instantly, there was a jump. You didn't come to that place like in a normal sort of speed, and so I was
some missing time.
Right, exactly. So I was like, oh, he hit me pretty damn hard. So I was like, I got to watch it and make sure I hit him back. And so after the fight, didn't really think anything of it. Well, when the fight was over, I had a big blue spot, big thing in my vision, which I associate from being hit in the noggin, like pretty darn hard. And so I was sitting there, and after the fight, I was just ecstatic and I was, happy. And so I had a blue spot, but I didn't really care because I won the fight, and it was a local fight. So we had, 400 people from our gym and with their families around just cheering. So it was like just pure energy there. And I went up to one of my students and we're taking a picture together, and the picture's on the internet somewhere. I was looking away from the camera, and then he's looking straight at the camera, and he's like, Chewy, he's like, what's going on? He's like, congratulations, man. He's, trying to talk to me. And I looked at him and I was like, hey, who is this? He's like, it's Corey. I was like, oh, I was okay. He's like laughing. He goes like, what's wrong with you? He's like, I can't really see you like right now because of that big blue spot was right in the center of my vision. And, later on I kind of, started to do some research into things that they were figuring out in football, like CTE and, pugilistic dementia. I was like, I really don't like fighting that much. Like if I really enjoyed it, I would keep fighting, because again, I'm not one of those people that thinks that you should sacrifice something you have a deep desire to, just for longevity's sake. But, I was like, you know what? I don't really like fighting that much. I like jiu-jitsu way more. So I'm going to focus on that. And plus I think I'm better at jiu-jitsu. So I'm going to focus on that. And that was the end of that.
Well, it's funny, all those weird neurological effects of getting hit in the head. I mean, that loss of time is certainly one. I mean, I know boxers who fought rounds and rounds, totally on autopilot, and they come out and they ask, okay, what round are we in? And they're telling them, well, you're in round 5. They're like, holy shit, I thought it was round 2.
Right.
Because they'd gotten hit in round 2 and they couldn't remember anything between then and now. Yeah. It's a little bit what happened to you there.
Yeah, I mean, it was a minor thing. Like mine wasn't too bad. It was just like a flash sort of thing. But, kind of going with what you said, one of my friends who fought, he fought in a Bellator fight. We had a very similar experience. So he fought a guy, and I want to say it was in the first or second round, he got it was an illegal knee, right? So he was down on his knees, and the guy kneed him right in the face. And when he did this, he definitely gave him a concussion, right? Because he didn't remember anything after the fight after that point. So he gets hit in the head. They stop the fight. He's okay. He gets up and he fights. He goes on to win the fight. After the fight's over, he's looking at the camera, like telling his wife he loves her, and can't wait to see his kid. We're walking out and we see some people that he knows and he's talking to them, whatever. And then we get back and we're, taking his gloves off, and he looks at me and he's like, Chewy. I'm like, what's up, man? He goes, what happened? Who won the fight? I was like, you won the fight. He goes, okay, good. And then he looked down at his hand. He's like, I think I broke my hand. And he started getting really upset about it. And then he would just go in a loop where he would like ask me, hey, Chewy, like, who won the fight?
Oh, that's not good.
So it was like on a loop.
Yeah, I've seen that at car accidents, like when there's brain damage, the people have recurrent short-term amnesia. Like, hey, what happened? Are my glasses all right? And then 10 seconds later, hey, what happened? And it's often a sign of serious brain trauma.
It's scary stuff, you know? So it was one of those things where I was like, man, this isn't good. You know, honestly, it made me really upset because he was a friend and I really cared about him. But, you know, it's one of those things, man, like when you get into like, you know, we have people that come in that want to do mixed martial arts and stuff. And, you know, there's definite consequence to it. I'm not saying that it's a bad thing. You know, if you really have the deep desire to do it, then you should do it. But you got to know what you're getting into.
There are extreme consequences to extreme skiing as well.
Absolutely. You know, you just got to understand them.
The trouble is, and I think when I talked to John Peretti, he made this point. We can talk about accepting responsibility all you want, but does an 18-year-old really have the ability to future project to when he's 45 and can't remember, you know, whether he has to work today or not, and is busy suffering all the symptoms from a misspent youth? You know, that's the ethically difficult area, because of course the testosterone-laden, charged-up 18-year-old doesn't think far to the future. And I'm here from the future to tell you that all your misdeeds when you were young are going to catch up with you. It's just a matter of time. You know, that time that you didn't tap to that neck crank, it'll remind you. Yeah. It's coming back. That time that you thought that break falling on wooden floors was cool because you're tough.
Did you do that?
Oh yeah, in Kajikembo days. Oh yeah, I remember getting thrown so hard on my hip. I think it dislocated the hip and then it popped back in because I was on crutches for 2 weeks. And the worst part of it, like the hip hurt like crazy, like insane levels of pain. We're talking 20 minutes to get out of bed. So it wasn't broken, but everything around it was torn. So I think that was the mechanism. But, or maybe just the bone got jammed and it bled. But nobody had told me how to use crutches. So I was going to McGill University at the time. And I lived, 5 or 10 blocks away from campus. I'd be crutching there. And my armpits were just killing me because I'm driving 100 pounds of weight per arm down into this small little crutch top, thinking that you hang by your armpits. It took me like several days to figure out that, no, it's not the armpits that carry the weight. So my hip was killing me. My arms were like, I had to stop twice a block to.
Your armpits were probably just like sort of the touch afterwards.
I've got one other interesting, like we've talked about kind of forgetting where you are or that repetition thing, but there are also some really weird emotional reactions. I remember I was stick sparring, so full contact stick sparring, dog brother style, with a guy who is a dog brother. I'm not a dog brother. It's a group out of California that basically they wear fencing helmets, either hockey or lacrosse gloves and not much else, and go at it with a full
those guys, like they had like a documentary on them.
Oh yeah, they've had documentaries. It's good YouTube fodder. And then one of the Machados actually went and competed in that. Basically, he went up. They crossed sticks a few times. Then he threw a stick up in the air, double leg tackle, takedown, and choke.
That's the way to do it, right?
But so we were fighting, and he came in, and I turned away, which I shouldn't have done. And so a fencing mask, your face is sort of protected, and then there's a metal strap that goes down against the back of your head. But there's the quarter panel of the back of your head on both sides is exposed bone. So my friend just ricocheted this super hard shot off the right rear quarter panel of my head. And we're going, whack. And then I break contact, and I'm like, stop. I take the helmet off, and I start sobbing. It's like the saddest, I don't think I've ever been more sad. It was like you told me my entire family had just been killed in a car accident. And I'm just sobbing for about 15 seconds. And then click, that turns off. And I'm just, what the hell just happened? And I'm like, I think we should stop sparring for today, because it wasn't pain. I've been in way worse pain, but it's just getting clocked in the head triggered this really weird neurological
so it wasn't
reaction.
Like pain, it was just like all of a sudden you got hit and it was like a switch turned on that like threw up this like overcoming like this overwhelming emotion to sort of cry.
Yeah, I mean just the same way that you saw blue light right? You got hit in the head. You saw blue light. I got hit in the head. I felt grief. Somebody else gets hit in the head, and
who knows?
I don't know. I start seeing visions of the lizard people who are really running.
The lizard people, the lizard people living on the flat Earth.
Yeah. Let's not go there. I've gone there too many times in previous podcasts.
Yeah. We'll steer clear of that.
We'll stick with a round Earth conspiracy. Yeah. Okay, so now you've got a story about getting your black belt. Can you take us through that?
Yeah.
Can you share that with us?
So one of the things that was just, I don't know, man. Like, everyone has, I'm sure, has these types of experiences, these weird sort of like things that happen around the same time or on the same time. That whole period when I became a head coach and doing all this stuff, like it was this, because I became a head coach when I was a brown belt. Basically, it was handed to me in 2009, and I started doing this stuff in full time in 2010. And when I decided to do this stuff full time, it was a kind of a weird decision because I was leaving a job that was paying pretty good money to make almost no money, right? Like barely enough to cover my bills.
What were you doing before?
I was working in IT. Basically doing like stuff behind cubicles and stuff like that and working on computers. And it was just one of those things where it paid good money, but it was one of those things where I felt miserable. I hated doing it. I would sit around and like look at jiu-jitsu books and I was like, God, I feel like there's something more I should be doing. And, the actual moment that caused me to go full time was the day, like it was in March. My instructor at the time was Renato Tavares. He was like the association head. He came in town. We had this big seminar. After the seminar was over, a bunch of us went out to celebrate our buddy's birthday and had a party together. And, it was just a great day. It was an awesome day of jiu-jitsu, technique, community, the whole thing. It was perfect. And then I was driving home, it was like 2 or 3 in the morning, and I realized that I had to get up to work for work in like 2 or 3 hours. And so I was like, God, this is terrible. And I had this like flash, come into my head. And so I pulled over into a parking lot and started doing, numbers on my flip phone at the time, and, using the little calculator. And I found a number and I called up my buddy who was the owner at the gym at the time. I was like, hey, can you make this number happen? Whatever. And he said, yeah. So we decided upon it. I was like, cool. So in June of 2010, I was like, cool. I did it full time and just took the leap, and it started to work out perfectly right off the bat. And then right after that, again, I'm broke and I'm like, I'm okay. My mother got sick. My mother was diagnosed with cancer. And so I was like, God, so it was just this weird sort of just time period. And then as I was, trying to sort of scratch and bite my way to help build up the business to make this, this ability to do this stuff full time and not have to go back to a normal job and be able to live somewhat comfortably, right? To make that a reality, my mother, was getting sicker and sicker. And it was the day that I received my black belt that, she passed away. It was just this weird sort of, it's just, I don't know what to say about it. It's like, it's this weird time, like, I'm big into interpretation of like mythology and religious stories and things like that. Like there's a guy, Joseph Campbell, and one of his big things that he talks about is like the death and the rebirth in people. And at that time, like it was this crazy year, man. I mean, just nutty, crazy year of changes and growth and like stress. And then it ended, on that day where it was just like, after that, it was like, I was a different person, and it was just a terrible thing to happen, but it is what it is.
That's a rough one. Was it, I'm going to pry a little bit. Was it so long coming and the person's done so much suffering that it's almost a relief?
Yeah. So, my mom was, and the thing I'll say real quick is that, death is going to come, it's for all of us at some point. But, again, if anybody's ever lost a loved one, the biggest thing is like, if you had someone that you really miss, be thankful for that because, not everybody does. Like one of my business partners didn't really have a mom. And so he never knew what that felt like to have a mom that was in his life. And so I'm thankful that I had her, but she had gotten sick and she had progressively gotten worse and worse and worse. And by the time that she was, ready to go, I mean, you knew it was going to happen, but it's like on the day that it actually happens, it's just, you can't like, it's a shock. Like the day that it happened, there was a seminar, right? So like, Hanada was in town again, and he was there, doing a seminar. And so he came in and, was teaching some stuff. And I kind of knew that I was going to get my black belt that day because I had been a brown belt at this point for a long time. And it was even a joke. Like one of the black belts that was at the gym gave me a 5th stripe on my brown belt because, I'd go to tournaments and I would beat black belts. And when I was in the gym, I was, routinely like, able to, get the better black belts. And so he's just here's a 5th stripe so I don't feel so bad. And when Hinano came in, I knew I was going to get my black belt. But, again, we're going through the seminar, and it was jiu-jitsu during this whole time, the training was kind of an escape from all the stress of that. And, Hanato stopped the seminar right in the middle of it. And, he gave out, some of the awards that he was going to give out to some of the guys. And he came up to me and, he said, "Congratulations, Nick." He gives me my black belt. And then my buddy Derek was there. And Derek, who was a good friend of mine at the time, he just comes up and he just hugs me and says, "I'm sorry, man." And then, I knew what he meant just by the tone. And even though that I knew it was going to come at some point, I remember I just fell. I literally just fell to my butt, because it's still.
So he was bringing.
Yeah, he was bringing the news, and he didn't even have to say what it was. He just said, "Man, I'm sorry. I love you, big guy." And I just fell. I just slumped because I knew what was going on. She was really sick at this time, but it was just one of those things where you just still can't really grasp it until it happens.
Well, as you point out, we are all due for a dirt nap at some point. The Great Convergence notwithstanding, maybe we'll 100 years from now be inside some mainframe and looking back at our podcasts and videos that we did.
Those archaic humans, and they're organic tissue, and
this isn't anything like the 100 million K video that we have now. Well, I'm sorry to hear that, but
it's kind of a weird thing to go from in the podcast, because it's such a.
But you know what? Everybody goes through suffering, and everybody goes through adversity in life, and I think actually jiu-jitsu is not a bad set of training wheels for that. When you take a look at how armies make soldiers, how police departments make police officers, how people learn to deal with stuff, it's usually through progressive desensitization. It's desensitization to progressively greater stimuli, right? And jiu-jitsu, in a way, because you are putting yourself in bad positions, you're getting ground on, you're getting smushed, you're getting tapped out. It's difficult, it hurts, it's sweaty, it's yucky. If you're dealing with somebody who's got claustrophobia or, some kind of paranoia about close proximity, it's even more intimidating. And by doing it, you are, I don't want to say making yourself a better person, but you're certainly exposing yourself to adversity and getting better at having some kind of equanimity around the inevitable adversity in life.
And I think that the thing that I think that jiu-jitsu can kind of do and wrestling can do is because, you have to find meaning in what you're doing. I think that humans, we're all looking for meaning in everything that we do, and I think that it sounds silly, but when you're grappling, and you're going through all this rough stuff and you're getting your face smashed and, you got your mouth busted for the umpteenth time and, maybe your knee's a little tweaked or, whatever, all these crazy things are always happening. You have to find a reason, why am I doing all this? What's the meaning of this? And you start to look for things to make sense of it all and to keep you going, because, what's the quote, right? If man knows their why, that they'll be able to find the how, right? So when you're going through all this training, you're going through the suffering, you find your why, you find your reason for doing this stuff, you find the meaning, and then you can push through anything else because you have that. And I think that sometimes, in life we have the same struggles. You have struggle. It's what happens, right? And you have to, a lot of times in those nasty situations, you have to find a reason, why? Why do I need to keep pushing through this? And, I think that jiu-jitsu, if you look at it that way, when you're talking about becoming a better person, a more self-actualized person, to reach their full potential, I think that when you get into it, part of it is you can find your own reasons why you want to push through these negative situations, these tough situations, these challenging situations, and those reasons come from within you rather than from somewhere else.
Well, I definitely think we should amend Maslow's hierarchy of needs to include jiu-jitsu right alongside self-actualization at the very top of the pyramid.
Just throw it right in there.
That's just me. Well, certainly you've had some students who've undergone remarkable journeys because of jiu-jitsu and have, it has helped them survive, literally. You want to tell us that story?
For some of the people that have watched the channel, then they probably know a little bit about this. There's one of my students. He's not actually my little brother, but I call him that. I'm I've known him since he was 11 years old, and for some reason I just took a liking to him. I remember when.
Hey Jamie, can you pull up promoting my quote little brother quote to BJJ black belt?
Damn it, don't have a Jamie.
Okay,
damn it, Joe Rogan's got him.
Okay, but if you search for promoting my little brother to BJJ black belt,
exactly. So that's the video, and with him, I've known him since he was 11. I for some reason really liked him. I promoted him through his belts. Like I just always asked like my coaches at the time, can I promote him? I just want to like wrap the belt around him for some reason. And, there was a point in his life where he was going through some really difficult stuff. And again, things are always relative, but at the time, with his teenage sort of visors on, what was going on was so bad that he was just like, I don't want to be here anymore. And so he tried to kill himself by swallowing a bunch of pills. And, it was gut wrenching for me because I remember going into the hospital and seeing him just kind of like out of it. And,
so he was already,
So this was when he was about, I want to say like 14 at the time. So he's, in the early teens, and he just like, I just don't want to do this anymore. So he ate the pill. So he'd been with me for about 3-4 years at this point. And, he got through it. The gym was there for him the whole way through. And, it was one of those situations where, when he came back from it, he realized how much, the people inside the gym really cared about him. You know what I mean? Like sometimes, especially people, they just feel alone, you know what I mean? And he had a chance to like, all of a sudden, like see what happened. Like, he made it out. He didn't die, but everybody was really worried about him. And he just got this outpouring of love for him from the gym. And so he sort of, he got that, and it helped him out as a teenager. And he continued to come to the gym and train. And, he just sort of got past all the negative stuff that he was dealing with, and he just dove headfirst into training from that point on, as he had been, since he was a younger kid. And, he's been able to help a lot of people through some really tough situations because, again, he's been there and done that. I know that from talking to him, he's helped some people, kind of not go down the same path that he was going down, in their younger days, because again, he's been there. That's like a situation I've never been in before, but he was there. And so jiu-jitsu helped. Jiu-jitsu, not just the training itself, but the community of people that he was surrounded by. We helped, lift him back up afterwards, so it's something that I think definitely, as he'll tell you, it really helped him out.
Yeah. It's amazing that. And I think you're right to focus on the community aspect of it. Whenever people ask me for advice, like should I change gyms or should I go with this teacher or that teacher, it's usually not. It's usually not about the teacher. It's usually about your training partners. Now, your training partners are to some extent determined by the teacher because it tends to follow. It tends to be a top-down effect that. If the guy's a total dick, then most of his top students are going to be total dicks, and it's going to be cool to be a dick to everybody.
Because, that's just like people come in, they're like, I guess, I'm going to follow the leader because he's going to show me how this thing's supposed to be done. So if this is how we're supposed to do it, I guess I'm supposed to be kind of a dick to people,
And I suppose for some people, that might be the right environment. It's not an environment I would want to participate in. Although, when you see some of the trash talking that goes on that you and I might take for granted, certainly I would take for granted, kind of a fire hall environment or a locker room environment. Some people might be offended. Some people might go, these guys are being total dicks to each other, but you're really doing it. To say it out of
you mean like the brotherly trash talking? Oh yeah. I feel like, especially with like in situations, that's how you're in. Like when someone because if you don't like the person, you don't talk trash to him. You just don't talk to him at all.
Exactly. You just ignore them completely.
And if you do, you basically lash out at them. But it's like when you walk in and like someone has, that's how I got my nickname Chewy, right? Like one of the guys I was, rolling with was kind of like he was a really good wrestler, and he was like the verbally abusive older brother that I never wanted. And he, and I mean that in a funny way, but he came in and when I was training with him as a white belt, he had been training for a while, and he was really tired one day and he was getting ready for a mixed martial arts fight. And we were shark tanking him, and I, did what white belts do. I spazzed out on him somehow, and he just called me, "You big dumb Wookie." It just came out like you big dumbass, but instead of dumbass, he got Wookie. And he would like say like the dumbest stuff to me and like mess with me and make fun of me. And it always ended with like a Chewbacca over here, And so that was like how I got that nickname. But it came from a place of like, he would mess with me, but nobody else got to mess with me, kind of thing. He's like, it's just part of that environment.
Well, an incredibly strong, long-lived, loyal, and badass creature. You could do worse. I don't know. You could have been. I don't know. I can't remember those little penguin-like things are in the latest Star Wars movie. I
haven't seen the newest one. I saw the last two, but I haven't seen the newest one. Is it any good?
Yeah. I thought it was all right. I've had arguments with people that saying it breaks the Star Wars universe. I enjoyed it for what it was. There are a couple giant holes in the plot. You really just have to ignore them. But I enjoyed it. I had a good time.
Yeah, all the guys that are like Star Wars nerds in the gym are like, it's not a good movie.
Well, let them try and write a movie. So obviously you got a really successful YouTube channel. So I wanted to ask you, like, what's the most common question that you get?
Oh man.
Or what are some of the questions that you get? I mean, I get questions over and over and over, and I kind of sort of want to shout through the phone, go, I've already answered
this one like twice.
But,
probably the one that I get like really often is how to roll with bigger people. Like people like roll with someone that's bigger than them and they're stronger than them, and they're like, how do I deal with this? This is such a frustrating situation, and I've done a couple of videos on it, and there's different positions you can use, but the biggest thing is you just got to like roll with people that are bigger than you so that your body can adapt to it and learn how to work, the techniques against someone like that. And then other than that, I mean, it's really, gosh, man, I get all kind because with the YouTube channel, I don't just answer like technical questions. And so with that, like I get a lot of questions that are just, that run run the whole spectrum, everything from like my girlfriend's not really digging me or not really doesn't like me training, to things like, I'm having a conflict with my father training. There's all these like weird, like sort of social issues that come up all the time. So it's really, I don't get one necessarily, but the one like rolling with a smaller or bigger person comes up probably the most often.
It's a perennial problem. And the thing is, even big guys worry about that, because even if you're 200 pounds, there's still going to be the 300-pound guy come in. Or if you're 200 pounds and 40 years old, there's going to be the 205-pound guy who's 20 years old.
We went to a tournament. We have a guy that's about 6'3", 6'4", 315 pounds, 330 pounds, something. He's a big dude. And he went to the tournament and he went up against a guy who was like 6'6". And 400 pounds, you know what I mean? And it was this guy was huge. Like these two guys like square off on each other. And it was just like two like big, you felt like you're watching National Geographic. These two big, like silverbacks are like looking at each other. And they did about the same thing. They like walked around a little bit and they just charged forward. It was just this big clash of just person. I still laugh because at one point the big guy got on top of our big guy, so the bigger guy was on top of the not as big guy, and he got a key lock and he just started screaming, and it was just like nobody really knew what was going on, but it was an interesting match. So yeah, you're everybody worries about rolling with a big guy, but you can learn how to deal with it. What do you think because you're in YouTube too? So what do you think like your question that you get most often is?
I think escaping side control against really big people, same as you. I think that's a real common question. One interesting revelation I had about my audience, both my podcast audience and my YouTube audience, is how many people watch it or listen to it who don't actually train.
Yeah, I get the same thing.
And I'm too old to train, or I'm too out of shape. I don't like the gi. There seems to be a long list of excuses. Mm-hmm. And it's easy to sit here and say excuses. If you've got some kind of terrible injury, you've got osteoporosis and you're going to break a hip, okay, I deal with that first and hopefully it's dealable withable.
Sure.
But as for age, Daniel Nasanto started jiu-jitsu at age 65 and it took him until 75 to get his black belt.
But a lot of them are excuses. It just is what it is. Like, you can find a reason not to do anything, or you can find a reason to do it. It's your choice how you depend to perceive it. So there are situations where people probably shouldn't be training because there's some real health risks, but a lot of them are just like you said. I don't want to do the gi, or I'm too old, or this, that, whatever the thing is. There's lots of those that you can come up with, or you can say, well, though that's the reason why I shouldn't do it, but I really want to do it, and this is why I want to do that thing. So I'm going to go with these reasons, and instead of going with the one that says I don't want to do it because of this.
I think almost the most legitimate reason to not start that I've heard recently is somebody wanted to start, but the gym in town was apparently a really dick gym, right? Like they hurt a lot of beginners. They're not nice to people. And the guy who runs it is sort of a psychopath. I don't know of the gym. I've not visited it. Never been in that town, but I can only rely on that person's account. And I think that's a legitimate, if that's true. Maybe, first of all, maybe the problem is you, maybe it's not the gym, but assuming it is the gym, I think that would be a legitimate reason not to start, or at least try and start your own training group, which I think is way more easy to do now than when you and I started jiu-jitsu.
Oh my God. Like I remember back when we started, man, like, well, you started before me. I mean, you were like a perennial sort of like martial arts geek, right? You did all everything. And then what year did you start jiu-jitsu?
Well, I don't know. I did judo when I was a kid, when I was at 12. And then in the early 90s, was it early 90s, late 80s, got our hands on the Gracie in Action tape. So we tried to recreate jiu-jitsu from scratch based off of Gracie in Action 1 and 2.
Awesome.
We were okay with hair pulling. And if you see photos of my hair back in the day, I mean, it was a pretty big mop. So that was a pretty big concession. You don't like the gi, but you're okay with using the head as a lever and the fro. So trying to recreate it then for a few years, then did more judo, focusing almost exclusively on the ground. But I think my first official jiu-jitsu instructor was in 1997. Yeah. But I'd been kind of poking at the edges of it, trying to figure it out for quite some time before that.
Yeah. So, I mean, you started even before me, and I started in 2003. And, we
would have killed for YouTube.
Yeah, I know, man. God. Like the YouTube now, like it's so like YouTube didn't come around until I was a purple belt, like really. And I remember just like looking at what it is now, it's just amazing, and even the amount of like instructional information. Like I remember buying mats and instructional videos back then, so I could train with my roommate at the time. And we bought some puzzle mats and we just laid them out on the basement floor, and we would watch techniques, and we would drill like one technique a night, and then we would like combine them together. So we would do technique 1 and 2 on the next day, and then next day we do technique 1, 2, and 3, and just kind of keep adding on to them to make these chains. But now it's like, God, there's so many good instructionals out there. You do plenty on your website. I have a couple. There's just so many out there now, so that you can watch on YouTube. And then if you find something you like and you want to go down like a deeper rabbit hole, you can go like buy a digital like video things, and you have instant access instead of like where I was. I bought the mats and then the videos, and they like took like 2 weeks to get there. So I was like, on edge. I'm like, God, I want to work on this technique already. But just that stuff wasn't around. And, going back to what you said about crazy coaches or like going into a crazy gym with, people, I get those questions a lot as well, where people say, man, like I'm at this gym and this is what's going on with my coach. And like I said, you don't know, you have to take the person's word for it that they're sending you a message. But I've actually been to a gym. I've been to several over the years of traveling where like there's weird things that go on that like I would never do in my gym. Like some of them, I know this is something big for some people, but like I went to one gym where I've been to actually several where the white belts wouldn't even come up and talk to me. Right. Like, and this is after like I've become like done the YouTube channel and stuff. So people knew who I was, and they wanted to come say, hey, but they couldn't because I would look at them and I'm like, I would approach them like, hey, what's up? And they're like, oh, I'm glad you came up and talked to me. I'm like, well, why didn't you just say something to me? And like, well, we're not allowed to because you're a black belt. I'm like, who gives a shit? Like, I mean, like, who gives that? I'm a black belt. So what? Like, I'm a black belt. So like, let me help.
It's not like a sumo stable where the junior guy has to wipe the bum of the biggest sumo competitor in the in the place.
Is that a thing?
Apparently.
Oh, yeah.
It could be like weird facts about sumo that I've watched on YouTube sometimes, but
that sounds awful. But even one of the coaches, man, like, golly, we were sitting back talking, and he'd had a drink in him or two, and he was just kind of like being very like open. And he's like, man, he goes, he told me, he's like, what my job is to do? I was like, I don't know what. Like, he's like, to make white belts quit. He's like, because I need to like sift through the weak ones or whatever, something like that. And I'm like, what? I was like, and I felt so bad because there was a white belt standing right next to me who had been talking, and I looked at him and he just kind of looked at me and put his head down. And I'm like, this poor bastard, like he doesn't even have a chance. Like, I would, back in the day when we all started training, it was just like, there was no structure to anything. Most of the time it was just like, you come in and you got thrown to thrown into the melee, and hopefully you stuck around, But I know that as a coach now,
at least that's more honest and more transparent than this bullshit pseudo-religious thing, like, don't make eye contact with Sylvester Stallone when he's on a movie set. Don't even think about talking to him.
Yeah, it's so strange. I mean, don't get me wrong. I guess if you want to run something like that, that's fine. But I think that's so weird. Like, it's so weird and culty. Like, for instance, if a guy comes into the gym, here, and I'm sure the same way with you when you train with people, like me as a black belt, especially the people that are coming into my gym and paying money, like I'm here to serve you guys. Like I'm in service to you. That's the way that works. You paid money to be here, and I want to give you everything that I possibly can to make sure you have a good experience, and I want to make you as good as I can. And so if you need something, I'm here. Let's do it. As long as you're inside the gym, like I'm here for you. And so I don't really get down with that idea of like having to have this weird sort of like sort of mindset towards your the black belts. They should be respected for what they can do, but I mean, they're still human, just like the rest of us. It's not like that you can't speak to them or anything like that.
Well, it's not theoretical for me. Back when I was doing traditional Chinese Kung Fu, the head instructor of the school very, very, very rarely taught a class. And I was kind of known as the guy who would go up and ask questions, because once a month, or maybe once every 2 months, I would gather up all my courage, he used to just be sitting at his table, like basically looking down, bow, and then sit down and ask some question about some interpretation of the form or whatever. Like, do you put your finger like this or do you put your finger like that? And he would, in his defense, he would tell you the answer. And I never got overtly punished for it. But just, it's still his fault for allowing that culture of, not celebrity worship, but, no, you're a human being.
Right.
But
perhaps he wanted that.
You're not. Yeah, well, I'm saying that's his failing. He allowed that worship culture to exist. Yeah. And I guess to some people that feels great. And I think it's probably much more common in the fantasy martial arts where you're never testing anything. It's not as common in jiu-jitsu and MMA.
Yeah, because I mean, like a lot of times you end up rolling, and that the truth comes out. Like when you're rolling with someone and you see like what they can do, like it just happens. And even in those situations, you can't hide. You can't say like, oh well, I got this really cool move that works on everybody. Well, let me see it. Like show me. You know what I mean? Let me see you do it.
No. You had it didn't work because you had your tongue on the pressure point at the top of your mouth, and you were crossing your left little toe over your left ring toe. Yeah. And that would screw up the chi flow.
Yeah, well, and that's another thing that people don't even appreciate. Like, there's this like sort of jujitsu, eating jujitsu sort of like thing going on where you have like people trying to segment themselves away from others. Like, you had people saying, well, we do self-defense and we do it the correct way. You guys do it the wrong way. And then like, the sport community, like, lashing back out, and you have these two groups sometimes. And I mean, it's silly. It shouldn't be that way. But people don't appreciate the fact that like, if you went back like, maybe 20 some odd years, like you were back in the day where like people were like into ninjutsu and like thought that you could like just touch people and they just die. Yes, like people still believe in that, but it's a little bit less like believable now because, you see like, well, if any of that stuff worked, well, why don't they go do it in like the UFC and go win millions of dollars and like be famous and everything else? Like, why don't they go do that? Instead of like,
for sure,
in this small little like dojo or whatever, you could be doing this.
Because they're so highly evolved ethically that they've transcended the need for money. And also they would just be banned. Like the UFC would not give them the stage because there would just be dead bodies everywhere.
You've been through it all with it.
Do you think you could maybe tone back that death touch by 50% and just make it like a knockout touch? Because if you could get that to work, then I'm pretty sure that you'd get a pretty juicy contract after you'd done something that nobody had ever seen before in some local MMA fight, and you'd knock somebody out from 3 feet away.
Well, and here's another thing, like okay, people have all these weird self-defense systems and things like that. I'm like, fine, show me. Like, phones are everywhere nowadays. Like, and people just, as soon as a fight happens, people record. And it's like, and you see fights all over the place and you see exactly what they look like. And they're very repetitive. Like if the person has any training. And so it's like, you would have seen some of this stuff pop up, but it doesn't pop up. You know what I mean? But someone that's that highly evolved probably won't get into a street fighter of any sort because they'll be able to talk them down, of course.
Well, although you do see some clever variations on that. There was like a purported Krav Maga street fight, or I think it was a restaurant fight where some female Krav Maga instructor was attacked by 3 guys and beat them up. And it looked really slick, but by the time it got to me, it had already come out that this was, like a simulated street fight. It was really well done. It was hard to tell, but bottom line is one woman beat up 3 guys. So like,
it's a nice headline.
The odds of that happening. Yeah, exactly. Let's take the most highly trained female fighter of all time and, who's not 250 pounds and put her in a situation against 3 guys. Let's take Boss Rutan in his prime and put him against 3 guys who actually rush him all at the same time, good luck. I mean, that would be, I mean, there are stories of Boss Rutan prevailing in situations like that. I wasn't there. I don't know. But it makes, unfortunately, if the story is too good to be true, it probably isn't.
Did they make it public like that? Like before, like when it came out, did they make it public that it was just a simulation, or did they try to pose it as like a legitimate street fight?
I am trying to remember. I believe it was posed as a legitimate street fight. I'll look for it and I'll send it to you. And I'll put that video, if I can find it, on the page on my site where I post this podcast. Cool. So if they go to grapplers.com/Chewy when this comes out, if I found it, I'll put that video on the bottom. I'm
curious to see like what that looks like.
Well, thank you so much. I hope that actually one day we get to meet up in person as opposed to doing this West Coast / not quite East Coast. So if people want to come train with you, how do they do that? And how do they find out more information?
Sure. So if you guys, if anybody's listening and they want to come train, Derby City Mixed Martial Arts, Louisville, Kentucky, they can look that up. They can search derbycitymma.com, check out the gym. If they want to come train, I always tell people we don't do mat fees, like we just don't like them. So we have people, from the YouTube channel, they come in all the time. And if you want to come train, no mat fees. If you have a great time and you want to support the gym, buy a t-shirt. But you can come in and train with me, Chad, and all the guys. And then if anybody's interested in finding out more about me or following me, they can go to jujitsu.net. That's my website, or they can just follow me on YouTube at just put in Jujitsu on YouTube and you'll find me there.
Awesome. And you're doing great work on that channel, and I'm sure it's helping a lot of people as well.
Appreciate it, brother. Thank you.
All right. Take care. Podcast listeners, if you found this interesting or useful or entertaining, please pass this episode on to somebody else in your social circle or in your training circle. Surely there's somebody else out there who would also find it interesting. This is the way the podcast grows. It's an organic growth by people like you passing it on to their friends and the people that they know. I really, really appreciate this kind of sharing. So thank you so much in advance, and good luck with your training.